They were just myths. Until a human ship emerged on her radar. Part 1. The signal, the monitoring station, was cold and quiet. Lieutenant Yuna sat alone in the dark room, watching her screens glow with the same empty data she had seen for 3 rotations. Nothing ever happened in the dead zone. That was why they called it the dead zone. No ships traveled here. No signals came through. Just empty space stretching out forever into the black. Yuna was young for her rank, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that all Valari shared. She had joined the collective's observation corps because she wanted to explore. Instead, they had sent her here, to the edge of known space, to watch nothing happen. She leaned back in her chair and let her eyes wander to the old star maps on the wall. Her grandmother had drawn them, back when the Valari still dreamed of traveling beyond their own systems. Those dreams had died long ago. The Dominion controlled everything now. The collective paid tribute and stayed quiet. That was how things worked. Yuna's grandmother had also told her stories. Stories about the ancient times, before the Dominion rose to power. Stories about a species that had lived far away in a corner of the galaxy that no one visited anymore. The humans. The old stories said humans were monsters. They said humans could survive anything. Poison, fire, the cold vacuum of space. They said humans had fought wars that lasted for generations, that they had weapons that could crack planets in half. They said humans were so dangerous that they had finally destroyed themselves, burning their own world in their endless hunger for war. Yuna had never believed those stories. They were just tales to frighten children. The humans were not real. They were myths. Her scanner beeped. Yuna sat up straight, her eyes fixed on the screen. A small dot had appeared at the edge of her range. Probably just debris. Old wreckage from some forgotten battle drifting through the void. She ran the standard analysis and waited for the computer to confirm. The computer did not confirm. The dot was moving. Not drifting. Moving. With direction and purpose. Yuna felt her heart beating faster. She ran the analysis again. Same result. Something was out there, and it was heading toward collective space. She tried to identify the vessel. The computer searched through every ship design in its database. Valari ships, Dominion ships, the vessels of a dozen other species that served under the Dominion's rule. No match. The ship's shape was wrong. Its energy signature was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. Then the computer found something in the deep archives. A file so old that the data was corrupted in places. A ship design from before the Dominion, before the collective had even reached the stars. A ship from the ancient times, a human ship. Yuna stared at the screen. Her hands were shaking. That was impossible. The humans were dead. They had been dead for 1,000 cycles. Everyone knew that. But the ship kept coming. She activated long-range scanning and pointed every sensor at the approaching vessel. The image that formed on her screen made her breath catch in her throat. The ship was damaged. Its hull was covered in scars and burns, marks from battles fought long ago. Whole sections of its armor were missing, but it was still flying, still moving through space toward her dot. Then a sound filled the monitoring station. A voice, crackling through speakers that had not been used in centuries. The translation matrix struggled to decode the strange language, but slowly the words became clear. This is the Earth vessel Horizon. We come in peace. Requesting contact. Yuna sat frozen in her chair. The voice was calm, steady. It sounded tired, like someone who had traveled a very long way. She should report this immediately. She should contact command and tell them what she had found. But she could not move. She could only stare at the screen and listen to the voice repeat its message. Over and over, into the empty dark. The humans were real. They were not dead. They were here. Yuna thought about her grandmother's stories. She thought about the tales of monsters who could not be killed, who fought until their bodies broke and then kept fighting. She thought about how those stories had always seemed so impossible. Now she was not so sure. She finally found her voice. Her fingers moved across the control panel, opening a channel to command. Her words came out in a whisper. "This is Lieutenant Yuna at Monitoring Station 7. I have detected an unknown vessel approaching from the dead zone. The computer has identified it as a human ship." Silence. Then a voice came back, sharp and disbelieving. "Repeat your last transmission, Lieutenant." Yuna swallowed hard. "I said it is a human ship, sir." "A human ship from Earth. They are broadcasting a message. They say they come in peace." More silence. Yuna could imagine the chaos at command as officers scrambled to verify her report. She could imagine the fear spreading through the ranks as the truth became clear. The myths were awake. She turned back to her screen and watched the ship grow closer. It was beautiful in a strange and broken way, like something that had been through fire and come out the other side. She wondered who was inside. She wondered what they wanted. She wondered if they were truly peaceful or if the old stories were right. The voice continued to broadcast. "This is the Earth vessel Horizon. We come in peace. Requesting contact." Yuna reached out and touched the screen, tracing the outline of the ancient ship with her fingertip. She had spent her whole life watching empty space. She had spent her whole life being told that nothing existed beyond what the Dominion allowed. Now everything had changed. She opened a return channel, not sure if the humans could even understand her language. Her voice was small in the vast darkness of space. "Horizon, this is Monitoring Station 7 of the Valari Collective. We have received your message. Please hold your position. Someone is coming to meet you." She did not know if that was the right thing to say. She did not know what would happen next. But as she sat alone in the cold monitoring station, watching the impossible ship float among the stars, Yuna felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. The humans were here. And maybe, just maybe, everything was about to change. They were just myths. Until a human ship emerged on her radar. Part 2. First Contact. Admiral Taiho arrived with 15 warships. They surrounded the human vessel in a wide circle, weapons ready but not yet powered. Taiho was old for a Valari. His blue skin faded to a pale gray. He had fought in the border wars against the Dominion decades ago, before the Collective had surrendered and agreed to pay tribute. He had seen things that still woke him in the night, but he had never seen anything like this. The human ship floated silently in the center of his fleet. It looked dead. Its lights were dim, its engines barely glowing. The damage on its hull was worse than the scans had shown. Taiho could see places where the metal had melted and reformed, where weapons had torn through armor that should have been impossible to break. This ship had been through war. Real war. The kind of war that the Valari had only heard about in stories. Lieutenant Yuna stood beside him on the bridge of his flagship. She had asked to be part of the contact team, and Taiho had agreed. She had found them, after all. She deserved to see what happened next. "They have not powered any weapons," Yuna said quietly. "They have not made any aggressive moves." Taiho nodded slowly. "That does not mean they are safe." He gave the order, and a shuttle launched from his ship toward the horizon. Taiho, Yuna, and 6 armed guards crossed the gap between vessels. The human ship's docking port opened for them without hesitation. They were expected. The inside of the horizon was dark and cold. Emergency lights glowed red along the corridors. The air was thin and smelled strange, like metal and something organic that Yuna could not name. Everything was smaller than she had expected. The ceilings were low, the doorways narrow. Built for a smaller species, a figure was waiting for them at the end of the corridor. He was shorter than any Valari, with soft brown skin and dark hair cut close to his head. He wore a uniform that was torn and patched in many places. His eyes were tired, but there was something in them that made Yuna's breath catch. Something old and patient and very, very strong. "I am Captain Dongwu," he said. His voice was calm and steady, just like in the broadcast. "Welcome aboard the Horizon." Taiho stepped forward, his hand resting on the weapon at his side. "I am Admiral Taiho of the Valari Collective. You will explain who you are and why you are here." Dongwu nodded slowly. He did not seem afraid of the armed guards or the warships outside. He simply looked tired. "We are from Earth," he said. "A planet far from here. We left our home 400 years ago, looking for a new place to live. Our navigation systems failed during the journey. We have been in cryosleep ever since, drifting through space. We did not know anyone else existed out here." Yuna watched the human carefully. 400 years. That was longer than the collective had even existed. This man had been sleeping while entire civilizations rose and fell. "Why did you leave your planet?" Taiho demanded. Dongwu's expression did not change. "Because it was dying. We used up its resources. We poisoned its air and water. In the end, we had no choice but to leave or die with it." Yuna felt a chill run through her. The old stories said humans had destroyed their own world. She had always thought it was just a tale. But here was a human, standing in front of her, saying that it was true. Taiho was not satisfied. "The stories say your kind were warriors. That you fought wars that lasted for generations. That you had weapons that could destroy planets." Dongwu smiled, but there was no joy in it. "We were many things. Warriors, yes. But also builders, dreamers. We made mistakes. Many mistakes. But we also learned from them." He held up his hands, showing them to the Valari. Yuna saw the scars now, up close. Burns that had healed into rough patches of skin. Lines where bones had broken and mended wrong. The marks of someone who had survived things that should have killed him. "I am not a warrior," Dongwu said. "I am just a man who wanted to find a home for his people." Taiho studied the human for a long moment. Then he looked around the damaged ship, at the flickering lights and the patched walls. He thought about the power it would have taken to travel so far, to survive so long. "How many of you are there?" he asked. 47, Dongwu replied. "We are all that is left. 47 humans. The last survivors of a species that had once ruled an entire planet." Yuna felt something shift inside her chest. She had expected monsters. She had expected weapons and threats and danger. Instead, she found refugees. The rest of the horizon was the same. Cramped quarters filled with sleeping pods. Storage rooms stacked with supplies that had run low centuries ago. A medical bay where the equipment was held together with tape and wire. And everywhere, the signs of repair and adaptation. Things that had been broken and fixed again, over and over for 400 years. Yuna found herself walking beside Dongwu as he led them through his ship. The other humans were awake now, watching the Valari with curious but cautious eyes. They were all different. Different skin colors, different hair, different faces. But they all had the same look. The look of people who had survived something terrible. "Your ship should not still be flying," Yuna said quietly. "The damage is too severe." Dongwu glanced at her, and something like amusement flickered in his tired eyes. "My people are good at surviving. We always have been." He stopped in front of a window that looked out at the Valari fleet. The warships hung in space like predators, their weapons still tracking the horizon. "Your admiral is afraid of us," Dongwu said. "I understand. The stories about my people, they are not all lies. We were capable of great destruction, but we were also capable of great kindness. We could build as easily as we could break." He turned to face Yuna directly. We did not come here to fight. We did not come here to conquer. We came here because we had nowhere else to go. Yuna looked at this small, scarred human standing in his broken ship, surrounded by enemies he did not know and could not defeat. And she realized something that surprised her. She believed him. She reached out and touched his arm, a gesture of peace among the Valari. Donghu looked at her hand, then at her face, and slowly nodded. "We will speak to our leaders," Yuna said. "We will tell them what we have found." Whether they would listen, she did not know. But for the first time since she had seen that signal on her screen, Yuna felt like she was doing the right thing. The humans were not monsters. They were survivors. And maybe, in a galaxy ruled by fear, that was exactly what the collective needed. They were just myths, until a human ship emerged on her radar. Part 3. The warning news of the humans spread through the collective like fire through dry grass. Within hours, every station and colony and outpost knew the truth. The ancient species from the old stories was real. They had returned. And no one knew what to do about it. The collective council met in emergency session on the homeworld. Yuna watched the debates on a screen aboard Admiral Taiho's flagship, her stomach tight with worry. Some council members wanted to help the humans. They saw potential allies, survivors, who could teach the collective new things. Others wanted to destroy the horizon immediately, before the humans could grow strong enough to threaten anyone. But all of them were afraid. Fear had ruled the Valari for a long time. The Dominion had taught them to be afraid. For generations, the collective had paid tribute and bowed their heads and pretended they did not remember what it felt like to be free. Fear was easier than fighting. Fear kept you alive. Now the humans had appeared, and the fear had changed shape. The council was not just afraid of the humans. They were afraid of what the Dominion would do when they found out. Yuna learned the answer 3 days later. A Dominion warship arrived at the edge of collective space, carrying a single passenger. An envoy from Warlord Karth himself, the most powerful being in the known galaxy. The creature who had conquered 12 star systems and crushed every species that opposed him. The envoy was a tall, thin being covered in black scales. His eyes were cold and empty, like chips of ice floating in darkness. He stood before Admiral Taiho on the bridge of the flagship and delivered his message without emotion. Warlord Karth has learned of the humans. He demands that you surrender them to the Dominion immediately. If you refuse, the collective will be destroyed. You have one standard day to comply. Taiho's face was calm, but Yuna could see the tension in his shoulders. The Admiral had fought the Dominion once before. He knew what they were capable of. "We will deliver your message to the Council," Taiho said carefully. The envoy's cold eyes swept across the bridge, settling on Yuna for a moment. She felt like something was crawling over her skin. "The warlord does not make requests," the envoy said. "He makes demands. You would do well to remember the difference." Then he was gone, and the warship jumped away into the dark. Yuna found Captain Dongwu on the observation deck that night. The Horizon had been brought aboard Taiho's flagship for repairs, its battered hull now resting in the main hangar bay. The human captain stood alone, looking out at the stars through a wide window. "You heard the message," Yuna said. It was not a question. Dongwu nodded slowly. "I heard. The Dominion will kill you. All of you. They will take your ship apart and study it for weapons. They will dissect your bodies to learn how humans work. They will erase every trace that your species ever existed." Dongwu turned to look at her. His eyes were calm. "I know." Yuna stared at him. "You are not afraid?" The human captain was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, and it was a strange smile, full of pain and something else. Something that looked almost like peace. "I have been afraid my whole life," he said. "Fear is normal. Fear is healthy. It keeps you sharp, keeps you ready. But fear cannot be allowed to stop you from doing what needs to be done. He turned back to the window. My people learned that lesson long ago. We were always afraid. Afraid of the dark, afraid of each other, afraid of the universe itself. But we kept moving forward anyway. We built cities. We cured diseases. We reached the stars. Not because we were brave, but because we refused to let fear make our choices for us. Yuna moved to stand beside him. She looked at the stars, the same stars her grandmother had drawn on those old maps so many years ago. "What will you do?" she asked. Dongwu reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. It was old and worn, its surface covered in scratches. He pressed a button and a hologram appeared in the air between them. Images flickered past. A blue and green planet covered in clouds. Cities that stretched to the horizon. Ships launching into the sky. Then fire, war, smoke rising from ruined buildings. People running, screaming, dying. And through it all, other images. Hands reaching out to help the fallen. Doctors working by candlelight. Children being carried to safety. "This is Earth," Dongwu said quietly. "This is what we were. The good and the bad. The beautiful and the terrible. We made mistakes that nearly ended us. But we also found ways to save ourselves over and over again." He closed the hologram and put the device away. "My people have been running for 400 years. We ran from our dying planet. We ran through the empty dark between stars. We ran because we had no choice." He turned to face Yuna, and his eyes were hard now. Hard and bright and full of something that made her heart beat faster. "I am tired of running. I am tired of being afraid. If the Dominion wants to destroy us, they will have to come and do it themselves. But I will not surrender. Not to them. Not to anyone." Yuna felt something stir inside her. Something she had not felt since she was a child, listening to her grandmother's stories. Something that felt like courage. "The Council will probably give you to the Dominion," she said. "They are too afraid to do anything else." Dongwu nodded. "Probably. Then you will die. Probably." Yuna was quiet for a long moment. Then she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about the humans," she said. "She said you were monsters. She said you were the most dangerous things in the galaxy. But she also said something else. She said that humans never gave up. That no matter how many times you were knocked down, you always got back up." She looked at the human captain, this small, scarred man from a dead planet far away. "I think I would like to see that for myself." Dongwu stared at her. Then, slowly, he smiled. A real smile this time, warm and genuine. "You might get your chance." Outside the window, the stars burned cold and distant. Somewhere out there, the Dominion was preparing for war. But in this moment, standing together in the observation deck, a human and a Valari had found something they both needed. They had found someone worth fighting beside. They were just myths, until a human ship emerged on her radar part 4, the stand. The Dominion fleet arrived at dawn. 15 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. They were massive, each one larger than any vessel the Collective had ever built. Their hulls were black as night, covered in weapons that could crack a moon in half. At the center of the formation flew the flagship of Warlord Korath himself, a behemoth of steel and fire that blocked out the stars behind it. The Collective Council had not surrendered the humans. They had argued and debated and delayed, unable to reach a decision. But the Dominion did not wait for decisions. The Dominion took what it wanted. Admiral Taiho's fleet was small by comparison. 7 ships, plus the battered Horizon that had been hastily repaired in the hangar bay. They were outnumbered more than 2 to 1, and their weapons were generations behind the Dominion's technology. By every measure that mattered, they had already lost. But they did not run. Captain Dongwu stood on the bridge of the horizon, surrounded by his crew. All 47 humans had refused to stay behind. Even the old and the sick had taken their stations, ready to fight. This was their ship. This was their home. And they would not give it up without a battle. Beside Dongwu stood Ensign Minji, the youngest member of the crew. She was barely 22 years old, with short black hair and eyes that were too bright for someone her age. She had been born aboard the Horizon during the long journey through space. She had never seen Earth, never felt real sunshine on her skin. But she was human, and that meant she did not know how to surrender. "Weapons are ready," she reported. Her voice was steady despite the fear that Dongwu could see in her hands. "Good." Dongwu looked around the bridge at his people. Engineers, pilots, medics, soldiers. All of them tired. All of them afraid. All of them still standing. "I am not going to lie to you," he said. "We are probably going to die today. Our ship is held together with tape and hope. Our weapons are 400 years out of date. The Dominion has enough firepower to destroy us 100 times over." He paused and let the words sink in. "But we are human, and humans do not die easy. We survived the death of our world. We survived 4 centuries in the cold dark between stars. We survived because we refused to give up, even when giving up was the only sensible choice." He turned to face the view screen, where the Dominion fleet hung like a wall of death. "Today we show them what that means." The first volley came without warning. Energy beams sliced through space, bright as newborn suns. The Horizon rolled hard to port, dodging the worst of the fire. Impacts shook the ship, sending sparks flying from overloaded systems. But the ship held. It kept flying. Down in the engine room, Chief Engineer Ji-Wan fought to keep power flowing. He was an older man, quiet and patient, with hands that knew every wire and circuit on the ship. When a conduit exploded beside him, showering him with burning sparks, he did not stop working. He simply patched the damage and moved on to the next crisis. The Horizon returned fire. Its weapons were primitive compared to the Dominion's, but they were not useless. Human engineers had spent 400 years refining them, adapting them, making them more deadly than they had any right to be. The first Dominion cruiser lost its shields in a burst of unexpected firepower. On the bridge of Admiral Taiho's flagship, Yuna watched the battle unfold with wide eyes. The human ship was impossible. It should have been destroyed in the first exchange. Instead, it danced through the enemy formation like a living thing, striking where the Dominion was weakest. "They are insane," one of the officers whispered. "They are completely insane." Yuna shook her head slowly. "No, they are human." The second Dominion cruiser exploded when the Horizon flew directly at it, weapons blazing. Minji had calculated the approach vector herself, finding a gap in the enemy's targeting systems that should not have existed. The human ship passed so close to the explosion that its hull glowed with reflected fire. But the Dominion was adapting. More ships converged on the horizon, surrounding it with overlapping fields of fire. There was nowhere left to run, nowhere left to hide. In the engine room, a fire had started. Ji-Won looked at the flames spreading toward the main reactor and made a decision. He sealed himself inside the burning compartment, using his own body to keep the fire suppression systems working. The temperature climbed. His skin blistered. But the engines kept running. Minji saw the warning lights and understood what was happening. She did not cry. She did not scream. She simply worked faster, pouring every bit of skill she had into keeping the ship alive for just a few more seconds. The third Dominion cruiser fell, its engines crippled by a desperate strike from the Horizon. But more enemies were closing in. The human ship was bleeding atmosphere from a dozen wounds. Its weapons were failing. Its shields were gone. On Taiho's flagship, Yuna turned to the admiral. "We have to help them." Taiho's face was pale. He had never defied the Dominion. No one in the collective had ever defied the Dominion. The fear that had ruled his people for generations screamed at him to stay back, to survive, to let the humans die. But Yuna was already moving. She pushed past the admiral and opened a channel to the entire collective fleet. "All collective vessels, this is Lieutenant Yuna. The humans stand alone against the Dominion. They are fighting for their lives. They are fighting for the right to exist." Her voice cracked with emotion. "They came to us as refugees, asking only for help. And we made them fight alone." She took a deep breath. "I am going to help them. Anyone who wants to join me, power your weapons. Anyone who does not, I understand. But I will not watch these people die while I do nothing." Silence. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, lights began to flicker across the collective fleet. Weapons powering up. Engines coming online. Ships turning toward the battle. Admiral Taiho stared at his officers, at his crew, at the fleet that was moving without his orders. Then he looked at Yuna, and something in his old, tired eyes changed. "All ships," he said quietly. "Attack." The collective fleet hit the Dominion from behind like a hammer blow. Taiho's flagship led the charge, its weapons blazing. The other ships followed. Years of fear burned away in a single moment of courage. The Dominion had not expected resistance. They had not expected anyone to fight back. For the first time in 100 years, they were caught off guard, and the humans were still fighting. The horizon, broken and burning, refused to die. It kept firing, kept moving, kept proving that the old stories were true. Humans did not give up. Humans did not know how to give up. The battle raged across the stars, and everything changed forever. They were just myths, until a human ship emerged on her radar. Part 5. Legacy, the Battle of the Dead Zone, lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the stars were filled with wreckage. 8 Dominion warships had been destroyed. 5 more were crippled, drifting without power through the debris field. Warlord Korea's flagship had tried to flee when the tide turned against him, but the collective fleet had caught it. The massive ship now floated in pieces, its master dead among the ruins of his ambition. The collective had lost 3 ships. Good ships with good crews who had found their courage at the last possible moment. Their names would be remembered, but it was the horizon that everyone spoke about. The human ship had taken the worst of the fighting. When the battle ended, it was barely recognizable. Its hull was torn open in a dozen places. Its engines were dead. Its weapons had melted from overuse. By every measure, it should have been destroyed hours ago, but it had kept fighting. Until the very last moment, until the Dominion fleet broke and ran. The horizon had refused to die. 17 humans had fallen during the battle. Chief Engineer Jiwon had burned to death, keeping the engines running. A young pilot named Sora had died when her station exploded. 15 others had given their lives in 100 different ways, doing whatever was needed to keep their ship alive for one more second. The survivors gathered in the ruined hangar bay of Admiral Taiho's flagship, where the horizon had been towed after the battle. Captain Donggu stood among them, his arm in a makeshift sling, his uniform covered in blood that was mostly not his own. Beside him stood Ensign Minji, her face blank with exhaustion, and the 30 remaining humans who had survived the impossible. Lieutenant Yuna watched them from across the hangar. She had fought too, had fired weapons at Dominion ships and watched them explode. But her eyes kept returning to the humans. These small, fragile beings who had done what no one else had done in 100 years. They had stood against the Dominion, and they had won. Admiral Taiho walked slowly toward the human captain. The old Valari looked different somehow. The weight of fear that had bent his shoulders for so long seemed to have lifted. He stopped in front of Dongwu and stood in silence for a moment. "Your ship cannot be repaired," he said finally. "The horizon will never fly again." Dongwu nodded. He had known this for hours. The ship that had carried his people across the galaxy, the ship that had been their home for 400 years, was dead. "We knew that when we started fighting," he said. "We did not fight to save our ship. We fought because it was the right thing to do." Taiho was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised everyone watching. He bowed. A deep formal bow of respect that the Valari only gave to their greatest heroes. "Your people saved us," he said. "Not just in this battle. You showed us that it was possible to fight back. You showed us that fear does not have to rule us." He straightened and looked at the gathered humans with something like wonder. "The stories about your kind were wrong. You are not monsters. You are not weapons. You are something far more dangerous than that." Dongwu raised an eyebrow. "What are we?" "Hope," Taiho said simply. "You are hope." The collective council met 3 days later. The debate was short. The humans were granted asylum, territory, and full citizenship in the collective. They were given a new ship to replace the horizon, larger and stronger than anything they had ever owned. They were welcomed as neighbors, as allies, as friends. But more than that, they were welcomed as teachers in the years that followed. Human advisors served on every collective ship. They taught the Valari how to fight, how to adapt, how to survive against impossible odds. They shared their technology and their knowledge, and they received the same in return. The Dominion sent 2 more fleets against the collective. Both were defeated. Other species, watching from the shadows, began to take notice. Began to wonder if maybe the Dominion was not as invincible as it seemed. Began to think about fighting back themselves. Yuna rose through the ranks quickly. Within 10 years, she was Admiral Yuna, commander of the largest fleet the collective had ever assembled. She led the liberation of 3 star systems from Dominion control. She became a hero to millions, but she never forgot where it started. She never forgot that night on the observation deck, standing beside a tired human captain and learning what courage really meant. Captain Dongwu lived to see his people flourish. He watched as human children were born on collective worlds, playing alongside Valari children in parks beneath alien suns. He watched as his species grew strong again, not through war, but through connection, through community, through love. His daughter, Jiwoo, was born 5 years after the battle. She had her father's eyes and her mother's laugh, and she grew up speaking 3 languages as easily as most children spoke 1. When she was 20 years old, she became the first human ambassador to the Collective Council. Dongwu was there when she gave her first speech. He sat in the gallery with Yuna beside him, both of them gray now, both of them carrying the scars of lives well lived. He listened as his daughter spoke about unity and peace and the future they could build together. And he thought about the old stories. The tales that had painted humans as monsters, as destroyers, as the most dangerous things in the galaxy. The stories had been wrong, but they had also been right, in a way. Humans were dangerous, but not because they were violent, not because they were cruel. They were dangerous because they refused to give up, because they could be knocked down 1,000 times and still get back up for the 1,001st, because they looked at impossible odds and saw only problems to be solved. They were dangerous because they carried hope like a weapon, and now they were not alone. Yuna reached over and took Dongwu's hand. They had become friends over the years, these 2 survivors who had found each other across the vast emptiness of space. They had watched the galaxy change together. They had built something new together. "What are you thinking about?" Yuna asked quietly. Dongwu smiled, his eye still on his daughter as she spoke. "I am thinking about myths," he said. "About stories. About how the things we believe shape the things we become." He squeezed her hand. "We were just myths once. Ghosts from the old times. Now we are something else. Something better." He looked at Yuna and his smile grew. "Now we are home." The collective flourished. The Dominion fell. And in the end, the humans who had been lost among the stars found exactly what they had been looking for all along. A place to belong. A people to love. A future worth fighting for. They were no longer myths. They were family.